Well, this is a big number, 606,000, perhaps not as big as we were thinking, but it is a record high for a calendar year. Politicians on both sides of the political divide would like this to be smaller. They won't say the number they would be happy with. So it's worth getting into the figures behind this, going through them and understanding where this has come from, where we're looking historically in terms of this number. So this is net migration over time. It's worth saying there has been adjustment in these figures. You can see back in 2018, obviously depressed by the pandemic, and then right up here. Now, this last bit is really, really interesting. There was this ramp up after the pandemic, but actually the peak for migration, net migration, came in September that year. That was 637,000. So what we're actually seeing here is a slight tailing off. And you can see that in terms of the types of visas that are being granted by the government. It's worth saying as well that the government is granting these visas. You've got study, work, humanitarian routes, asylum, family and other. Study and work are the big ones here. Now, when politicians talk about reducing this is the problem they come up against. That big number is made up of these still big but smaller numbers. So study, work, humanitarian routes. Now, study brings in a huge amount of money for the Treasury. Exports there are bigger than aerospace exports in terms of students paying fees when they're coming from abroad. Work, a huge amount of that has been driven by people getting health and care special visas. So honestly going to the public and saying, well, we're going to have fewer people working in the NHS. That's going to be tough. And then humanitarian routes. This is people coming from Ukraine, coming from Hong Kong, coming from Afghanistan. We know, according to polling, that these are very, very popular. So that is the tricky bit with this in terms of, well, how do you reduce that number? Even if you're getting rid of something like family numbers, which has been proposed, that's not going to make a huge dent in that. But then the other side of that, going back to that graph where we saw it slightly tailing off, what we are starting to see is some of the effects of emigration, people leaving the country compared to immigration here. So when it comes to study, we saw that big bounce back after the pandemic. People couldn't come here. Perhaps they were doing online courses. They changed that. They were able to come here, so they got that visa. What we're starting to see in statistics already, some of those people who were here in December 21 arriving, they've started to go home. That's expected to increase over the years. And then when we go to work visas, they were created to fill the shortages we saw in the NHS that we reported on all over the last year. A lot of those jobs have been filled. There'll be less of them. And the same with Ukrainian visas, especially. We saw 15,000 people applying a week at the start of that. That's now down to 1,000. So there is hope, if you're from the government side, that this will continue to come down. It's certainly not going to be in the tens of thousands, though. And the other questions, this is 606,000. That is the equivalent of the size of Glasgow nearly in terms of the population added to the UK. You think of all the infrastructure that a city like Glasgow has, hospitals, schools, houses. Is the government doing enough about that in terms of infrastructure? So people talking about that number, whether it should be higher or lower in the future, but that is the number today. The other question should be, is there the investment to make sure that's a comfortable accommodation?